online for teaching and learning purposes for staff, to understand, of course, some of the questions and so on. So just as you can see, you just need to acknowledge it's being recorded, but really for the first period, the one being recorded is me for, again, archiving purposes. You can also contact UTS at the email below if you don't want to participate in this recorded webinar and discuss questions. In terms of asking questions, there's a sort of standard Zoom webinar format. Some of you will be more familiar perhaps than others. There's a Q&A box, and you should be able to ask questions there. And when I finish presenting, I should therefore be able to see your questions also. Okay, so the UTS Master of Architecture. The course director of the UTS Master of Architecture is Professor Anthony Burke. He's away on leave this semester. And myself, Professor Gerard Reinmuth, is the acting course director. I've also been the course director in the past. In fact, when UTS transformed, you might say, the master's program about 10 years ago to the version you see now. It sits as part of course, a nested set of courses. The School of Architecture sits within a faculty which has also design and built environment, which is a very important thing, a very important opportunity in terms of talking to people from other disciplines and also doing electives in those other disciplines. The school has 3 programs: architecture, landscape architecture, interior architecture. And the architecture discipline has, as you can see in the bottom, the Bachelor of Design, the Master, which you've probably done if you're listening to this webinar, the Master of Architecture. There's also research, and then, of course, a PhD program. In terms of the Masters of Architecture, it's, in simple terms, a 24 credit point semester. 50% of that, 12 credit points, is made up of the design studio, as has always been. I can't imagine it really being otherwise. The key centre where those skills in design and synthesis are developed. We then have 6 professional practice points, so it's 1 subject every semester. A very specific offer of UTS is its professional practice program. I think in Australia it's arguably the largest in terms of contact hours. 4 subjects, 1 for each semester of the Masters, and then electives. So that also means a quarter of your credit points are effectively self-driven study or self-chosen subjects. And after 4 semesters, or after more semesters, if you choose to do it slower, but on the accrual of 96 credit points, then you have the Masters. The studio takes place in Building 6 at UTS on Harris Street, 702 Harris Street, if you want to go and have a look. There's a series of design studios there. They remain, of course, as always, again, has been the home of thinking and learning about design. The key value of the studio is actually not just interaction with your teachers, but interaction with each other and watching each other do things. And thankfully, I can say in this sort of post-COVID or living with COVID world, the studios are now back to full capacity. And UTS has a very strong commitment, I should say, certainly the architecture program, to in-person. We've discovered during COVID, yes, the benefits of some remote teaching and learning, but also the dilemma that learning new skills is very, very difficult, and design skills is very difficult. So there's a great commitment to being together with you learning. Making is a big part of what we do. The T in UTS stands for technology, and there's a commitment in the school to technology, and there's some key members of staff who have expertise in making in all forms. And of course, one of those forms is robotics, and down the laneway at the back of Building 6, you can peek in and see this robot doing its thing. We have mezzanine space, where there's actually a lot of another sort of, let's call it, intense computer-based space, where often the computer-based master studios happen. By computer-based, I mean people dealing with parametric modelling or other forms of computation. Of course, everything involves some form of computation. And also in throughout the building, there's a series of spaces where we sometimes do one-time models or test different things within the school. So as I said, we make many different things. We sometimes make mock-ups. This is a mock-up detail, 1-to-1. We, of course, make models. And now, again, it's a delight to be back teaching. I just came myself from teaching the Master's Studio and seeing models again. And as I said, also sometimes making 1-to-1. We also do situated making. There's been a series of studios and electives that actually happen with key sites outside the university, and so often they'll be making in place. In terms of the studios, we have a series of types of studio. There are three main ones I want to mention in this very brief introduction. One's called Studio Plus. The way the course is currently configured, you have to have done 2 of those in your 4 studios. Studio Plus is a studio that's really lent toward the formal accreditation processes. I can answer questions about that if needed, but UTS is an accredited course, which means you can complete the course and register, go on to do the processes to register as an architect. And Studio Plus focuses on the delivery of key technical skills, coordination skills, integration of structures and other knowledge in a much more complete proposal. Very importantly, counterbalancing that, we have Studio X. That is very experimental studios, sometimes tending almost to art and sculpture practice as much as architecture practice, looking at often more theoretical questions and enjoying the freedom that comes with that. And we also have interdisciplinary studios. So as I mentioned, we have landscape and interior programs in the school, and at the moment in the Masters, there's a big crossover, particularly in the first semester of every year, with landscape. And so there are studios that as architecture students you can do, led by landscape teachers. And I think in this current environment, thinking more about sustainment, about landscape, and also about working with country, that is working with and understanding Indigenous knowledge regarding landscape, having that landscape capacity is, I think, a profound important part of the UTS offer. As I said, we also then have electives. I'm taking a travelling studio elective to Copenhagen in early December. As you can see here, we have drawing electives and detailing electives. One can also go into the built environment school. A lot of the students choose to do project management electives. So there's a series of electives we can do. Really, it's as broad as you want, and any postgraduate subject in the university, in fact, can be with permission given as an elective. Of course, COVID put a restriction on what we could do regarding visiting tutors and lectures. That's thankfully now in the process of restarting. UTS has always understood itself as a very globally oriented school, interested in what people are doing elsewhere, inviting people from elsewhere to here. And this was one such studio from a very well-known Spanish teacher who ran this a couple of years ago, just before COVID. This is last semester's, actually no, I think it's a combination of 2 semesters of studios showing the range of things we have in our Master Studio program. To talk about a couple domestic formalities, on the left is a studio about housings running 4 and 5 years, very important studio, rethinking domesticity and housing in this current environment, thinking of multi-gen families, different types of families, affordability and so on. Bottom one, Antarctica, was just one of those studios I mentioned, run by one of our landscape team, looking at architecture in Antarctica. Things like Fire and Apocalypse Now deal with excess of tipping points, deal with climate change, for example, and there are many ways we've been looking at that. Architecture of Relationalities, my studio, looks at the role of the building in the decisions we make, and where you might say decisions might result in a building or something else. And Mohammed Maki, for example, down the bottom is then a specific teacher who deals with computation, as I mentioned before. So very wide range of studios. That's something, again, we pride ourselves on. And the studios are done, I should say, via ballot system. So literally the studio teachers present at the start of every semester, and then you vote. If there's 10 studios on offer, you vote 1 to 10. And as you move through the semesters, your preference changes. That is, when you're in the final semester, your first preference is the one you get. When you start the course, sometimes you might get your second or third, because of course you eventually become a final semester student and get that first preference regardless. This is just one project that Anthony had in here by Random Brown Bill that won a number of prizes actually in 2021. A project working with Shannon Foster and Joe Kinnebra. They run a studio around working with countries. Shannon Foster is a registered traditional land owner, and they together also run a practice called Bangawara. And they ran this incredible studio with Rhiannon looking at Goat Island, and it's effectively a sort of convalescent home type logic, but for Indigenous people in that place. And there's just incredible layers of understanding about landscape, about ritual, materiality in detail you can see. So this is just an example of one of the sort of new forms of research and design that are coming out of the school. At the same time, we had a project win the solar decathlon, or win a prize in solar decathlon, which is a huge American sustainability prize. Been going for a long time. As you can see by the drawings compared to the previous one, very concrete. You might say much more on the outset conventional, as it looks more like a building you might know, but it's very rigorous in the way it thinks through environmental detailing and systems, and as they won an international prize. A key part of the education process is still the jury system. It's very important. I'm a practicing architect as well as professor at the university. I'm sitting in my office where you can see some work behind me here. What we do every day is present to all sorts of different people in the public realm. Sometimes they're experts, sometimes they're not expert, sometimes they're ministers in government, sometimes they're developers. And so, of course, the jury process is a very important process that has you all familiar with presenting things, because the rest of your lives you'll be presenting things to your bosses or to your clients or stakeholders. The Masters has 3 crits in the semester for the studio. It's what we call a midterm. That's really when people are in the research phase. We then have what we call a pre-final, where the drawings look fairly final, but they're still in, let's call it draft form, ready for lots of comments. And then, of course, the final review. And again, pre-COVID, these were fairly festive, almost celebratory events, as you can probably see by the photos. Certainly in my studio, I'd say many, there's a very positive approach taken to the crit. It's a celebration of the work, as much as, of course, a review. With so many diverse studios and so many diverse things going on, we also, oops, I missed a slide, or it's deleted, but I was going to mention quickly, we talk about parity, and this year leaders all meet and discuss differences between the work. I'm, as the professor of practice, the one who's really been responsible for a number of years for the professional practice program, which you see on the screen now. Has 4 subjects. One, starting research cultures, really talks about research in architecture and the sort of questions of professionalism around that. Then we get into what you might understand as more conventional professional subjects, being the profession, which talks about effectively the things that might motivate you to run and structure a business in architecture. Finance and project management talks to all the contractual knowledge we have to have in running projects as registered architects. And then advocacy talks about the role of the architect as a public intellectual. Again, architecture is a profession. There's the idea of the disinterested professional, that is someone whose job is not just to do work, but to help society understand things about its city and advocate for those. The electives, as I said, are numerous. A key part of our project also now is re-internationalization, you might say, after COVID. We had lots of course, online things, and what we've decided to do is actually make the best of that, where we now have more people visiting, but in the Architecture Masters program, we have an international studio every semester, which is the one that's left online. And we're working with different people in different parts of the world who are teaching you. So for those who for some reason want to do an online and also access someone outside the school, that option exists every semester. Last semester, I coordinated 3 Danish architects working, showing a showcase of Danish architectural thinking. And this semester, 2 academics in Israel running a studio. So in a way, to conclude, this then builds out to the sort of, again, bigger picture, again, being reconstructed as we depart the constraints of COVID, public lectures, master's guest lectures, workshops, exhibitions. It's a very active school. I'll say something's always happening, and the work ideally is always on show. So that's my quick synopsis in perhaps took 15 minutes of the school. You can find more out. It's definitely worth following us on Instagram. It gives a picture of what we do. Or you can email Anthony and as I said, he's away for another month or so, but you'll get to me. Should have put my email in there. And now we're at the questions point. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can see the questions. And I can see Luke's put in the chat a note about any questions to also DAB.communication, or also link you with me if needed. So unless I'm looking at the wrong part of the screen, I cannot see any questions. So the question.
We don't have any questions just yet.
And also, I should say, I'm happy to re-explain any of that. Or again, you can save your questions for an email, and I'll personally email you back with answers to those if you would like. All right. Oh, one question has just appeared. I can see. So we've had a question wanting to ask about the studios. Is it a typical single project that's developed throughout a semester, or are there multiple briefs? What generally happens is each studio tutor, I should say the studios are very diverse. So in a way, the answer is all the above and more. For example, my studio this semester is looking at Lismore in the case of flooding. So students had to go to Lismore, understand impacts of flooding in the city, and then choose both a site and a brief. So very, very open. In another case, someone's doing housing, a sort of actually a women's refuge. So the brief's very precise, the site is known, and they're working on that all semester. So really there's that complete variance. And when you choose studios, the tutors always talk about what they're going to do and how open it's going to be. So if students are feeling confident about making their own project and doing their own research to work out what the project is, let's say within a studio theme, then there are studios for those. If there are others that are more comfortable to have a brief and have a site, which of course saves a lot of time, because often in those larger studios, more expansive studios, it can take 4 or 5, 6 weeks to work out what the project is. They can do those. Next steps in terms of applying for masters, we'd have to have formally answered by our marketing team. As I said, I'm the temporary course coordinator, so running the course but not being involved with applications so much. But you can probably get an answer via the DAB.communication email. So it's another question that's come through there on the formal processes. It all depends on it's a very personal question, where you're coming from, if it's another bachelor course, if it's as a mature age student, if it's international, etc. So that's a very good one to have answered in a customized way. And I'll just perhaps ask if there are any more questions with perhaps a minute or so to go. Yes, there's one more. So this is one I'd ask you to email the db.communication email. This is the question around working in an unrelated field. That's a very good example of it. Let's call it a very specific question. First answer is yes. I've tutored and seen some excellent people go through who came from a completely different field. In fact, because architecture is about, of course, people and society, there are many great advantages in actually coming from another field, another education. So the answer is yes, great idea. The question is then, what's the process? The process is fairly strict in that one does a bachelor and then a master's. But of course, there can be credit given for different or related study, which might sometimes mean the bachelor component is shortened, if that makes sense. But again, that's a question I'm very happy to answer via an email to TAC, which can be arranged via the dab.communication@uts.edu.au. But I'd certainly say very much welcome that. And in fact, I just came from shooting my students just now, and 2 of those are exactly in that case. Been out in the masters, started later, coming from different fields, and of course made great contributions because of that world view and perspective. So I think generally, look, there's a huge team at UTS that are very helpful in managing all these questions in detail and in a very personal, customized way. So I also, as part of my role, I think it's every Monday, have one-on-ones with people, 15-minute meetings. So if any of you have more questions, you can also do that. And if I don't know the answer, I'll always find out what the answer is and get back to you personally. So please, please don't hesitate to find out more, and don't think we're not approachable. I'm just this head on the webinar screen. I'm very happy to have a one-on-one chat with you. Great. Well, it's okay with the communications team if I can't see. Oh, there's one more question down the bottom. Yes, there will be a student exhibition this semester. Another question. It's being organised now by the coordinated undergrad. It'll have both undergrad and master's work. It's going to be at the school. I think it's on the 24th of November, but if you keep an eye on our Instagram, details will be provided. But in late November, there most definitely will be an exhibition, the first one in a number of years. So it'll be probably more modest than in previous years, because again, we're all waking up, as it were, post-COVID, but I think that'd be a great thing to do and come and look at. And now all of you have seen me on this screen. If you are at that show, and I'd recommend all of you online to attend that, come up and say hello to me and tell me you're on this webinar, and we can chat about the work. I'd again be very happy to meet all of you. So do come along. That's a really good idea. Thanks for that question, actually. Thanks for all your questions. All the right things. And again, apologies if I'm not being super specific on some of those emissions things, but it really is a one-on-one thing. But again, we have the commitment to talk to you and work with you one-on-one to find the right pathway. So please just get back in contact with us, as I can see is being noted in the chat. Great. Well, we are now at time. There are no more questions. I'm going to bid you all farewell. I'm not sure the comms team has any concluding comments you want to make, or if I press the red button, as it were, and we end the webinar.